Yeah, I was just wondering, why should we prove things from first principles, and how can you decide that the accepted method for proving things is the first principle, from the first principles?
Thank you. Why should we prove things from first principles? There's more than one way of proving things. From first principles is one of the ways you can prove things from a logical perspective. There are other ways, from induction, from abduction, from some kind of deduction, which sometimes relies on some kind of induction or abduction. There are different ways of proving things in the world. That's why the scientific method works. And by the way, we're not against the scientific method. In fact, we invented the scientific method. Muslims invented the scientific method. So the point of there being a contradiction between Islam and the scientific method is something I didn't respond to. However, we know from the philosophy of science that science is not incorrigible. So it's something which is subject to change. And in fact, Karl Popper said that this was the thing that made science what it is, this falsifiability in his words. Having said all of this, to answer your question, we don't need to prove it from first principles, but what I was trying to do with my esteemed interlocutor today was let him use the same standards as he was using with us when we were having to prove God's existence, which is metaphysical, right? Because God, we wouldn't say, is physically dwelling in the sense that he can be detected by a microscope or some telescope or something. He asked us for evidence in that respect, so I wanted to ask him for evidence using his very methods of inquiring truth. And what he admitted today was that there's a difference between fact and normativity. Normativity means how something has become part of the discourse of, let's say, normality. Yeah. So that's, of course, I agree with this. Fact and normativity are two different separate things. It doesn't have to be separate, and it doesn't have to be disjunct. However, what I will say is, if you're going to make a case and tell us to be something, whether it's believing human rights, the 30 articles, which, as the questioner was quite right in pointing out, was a collection of people that came in the UN Convention 1948 and decided on what 30 points should be the human rights. And that this, in his words, is correct. It's a development, meaning it keeps changing your mind. What he means by development is social forces are continually coming back and asking questions. Whoever has the loudest voice wins at the end. One of the human rights is not your right to tribal lineage. It's because tribalism is not part of the Western post-colonial narrative. So it's usually what happens in the West will trickle down to the rest of the world. What's important in the West, and that's another issue with human rights. There are many issues with human rights. They focus too much on rights, what you're owed, and not enough on duties, what you owe. That's why you don't have any mother's rights in the 30 conventions. Of all the things you've been mentioning, your right to be good to your parents is not one of the rights. Can you imagine? So the point I'm making to you is, you can't tell us to believe in something which, in your own admission, is not provable, it's not static, it's not incorrigible, and is fluid and subjective. That's unfair. I believe that's unscientific as well.